In a town called Hayden, Arizona, 6 houses were listed for sale this year at a median price of $47,500, and most of them still took more than 200 days to sell. That is not a typo, and it is not a market crash. It is a copper smelter town where the soil in nearly 250 yards was excavated and replaced because it contained arsenic, lead, and copper at levels the federal government considered dangerous to children. People will drive past a house that costs less than a decent used pickup truck, slow down out of curiosity, and then keep driving anyway. I have spent a lot of time reading county assessor records and Census Bureau tables, and Arizona, more than almost any other state in the country, is covered in these towns, built fast around a single resource, and then left to fend for themselves the moment that resource stopped paying. Places where the price tag looks like a typo, and the story behind that price tag explains exactly why nobody is rushing to sign the paperwork. Today, we are looking at 8 of them, from a poisoned smelter valley to a canyon town that has spent 150 years refusing to stay dead. And every single fact you are about to hear came from real records, county archives, and census tables, not guesswork or rumor. Before we get into the town with the arsenic in its yards, let me ask you something, because I am genuinely curious. If you are watching this from one of these forgotten corners of the American West, or even just somewhere with its own version of a boomtown gone quiet, drop the name of your town in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if you want more of these deep dives into the towns America built and then walked away from, the subscribe button is sitting right there, and it costs you nothing but a click. Now, let's go to the town that started all of this. Hayden sits where the Gila River meets the San Pedro River, about 100 miles southeast of Phoenix, in a narrow valley that the wind seems to funnel through like a chimney, kicking up dust that settles on porches and parked cars long after the smelter's shift has ended. The town exists because of one thing: a copper smelter built by the American Smelting and Refining Company known as ASARCO to process ore hauled down from the Ray Mine 15 miles away. For most of the 20th century, that 1,000-foot smokestack was the reason Hayden had a grocery store, a school, and a barbershop. Workers moved here from all over the copper corridor because the smelter paid better than almost anything else in rural Arizona. And for a while, a job at that smelter meant a real shot at owning a home, raising a family, and retiring with something to show for it. Copper prices collapsed in the middle of the 2010s, and hundreds of jobs went with them almost overnight. But the deeper problem here was never just the economy. Arizona health officials found that the air in Hayden carried arsenic levels roughly 60 times higher than an unaffected area would show, and children tested in the community had more lead in their blood than the national average. The Environmental Protection Agency spent years excavating contaminated soil from residential yards, vacant lots, and dirt alleys across town. Today, around 500 people remain. Median household income sits near $30,000 a year, and close to a third of residents live below the poverty line. The catch here is not subtle. You're not just buying a cheap house in Hayden. You are buying a house inside a federal cleanup zone next to a smelter that is still operating, in a town whose only real employer is the same company that caused the contamination in the first place, and whose future is tied entirely to whether that company decides to keep running the plant or not. Some longtime residents will tell you they would not leave for anything, that this is simply home and always will be. Others will tell you they are just waiting for a reason or the money to finally go. 1,400 miles from any ocean, tucked into the folds of the Surbet Mountains north of Kingman, where the road narrows and the cell signal quietly disappears, sits a town that has been dying for 80 years and simply refuses to finish the job. Chloride was founded around 1863, named for the silver chloride ore that miners pulled out of these hills by the ton. At its peak, more than 70 mines operated in the surrounding mountains, and chloride's population swelled past 5,000 people, making it, for a time, the county seat of Mojave County, complete with saloons, hotels, barbershops, a 2-story schoolhouse, and, by most accounts, a main street busy enough to feel like a real city out in the middle of the desert. Then the ore thinned out, the way it always does eventually in a mining district, no matter how rich the initial strike looks on paper. By 1917, the population had fallen to about 2,000, and by 1944, when the last major mines shut down over the rising cost of extraction, chloride was, by almost any definition, a ghost town. It never quite finished dying, though. Today, the population hovers somewhere between 150 and 300 people, many of them retirees drawn by the silence, the desert light, and the murals a wandering artist named Roy Purcell painted into the surrounding rock face back in the 1960s, then returned decades later to repaint. Just this year, a listing went up offering 2 fixer-upper cottages on 3/4 of an acre for $75,000 total, with the seller willing to carry the financing themselves. The catch in chloride is isolation multiplied by aging infrastructure. The nearest hospital is a serious drive away. The town's water system is old and locally run, and there is no real economy here beyond tourism, retirement checks, and whatever work people can find 40 minutes down the road in Kingman. Even the murals that draw the occasional busload of tourists cannot change the fact that chloride survives on nostalgia rather than payroll. Now travel southeast, almost to the New Mexico border, to a stretch of high desert along the old Southern Pacific Rail line, where a town called Bowie once thrived, simply because trains needed to stop there. In 1920, Bowie's population peaked at 885 people, almost entirely because of its role as a railroad hub, feeding the ranches and farms of the San Simon Valley below the Chiricahua Mountains, where water tanks and depots once meant steady work for anyone willing to show up. As diesel replaced steam and rail travel consolidated onto fewer stops, that one reason for existing quietly disappeared. By 1930, the population had already dropped by nearly a third, and the decline never really stopped after that. Today, fewer than 400 people call Bowie home, and the median property value sits at just over $60,000, one of the lowest figures recorded for any community in the state. Close to 45% of residents live below the poverty line. What remains is agricultural. Pecan orchards, walnut groves, and small operations growing peaches, apricots, and grapes in a valley most people only ever see through a car window on the way to the Chiricahua National Monument or the crumbling adobe ruins at Fort Bowie. The catch in Bowie is straightforward and unforgiving. There is no employer left to speak of, no downtown to walk through, and no real reason for a young family to stay once the older generation is gone. If you buy here, you are buying a home in a place people pass through, not a place people build a career. And the nearest hospital, grocery store, and gas station all require a real drive on a 2-lane highway that empties out fast after dark. For a very different kind of collapse, drive north into Pinal County, to a town that was never supposed to feel old in the first place. San Manuel was built in 1953 from bare desert by the Del E. Webb Construction Company, the same firm that would later build the retirement empire of Sun City, just outside Phoenix. This was Webb's very first master-planned community anywhere in Arizona, engineered from the ground up around a single enormous copper mine and smelter complex. Row after row of nearly identical masonry homes went up along wide, curving streets with parks, a shopping district, and landscaped yards, for a population planners expected to eventually reach 8,000 residents, living a comfortable, orderly company life. For decades, it actually worked. By the early 1990s, San Manuel had about 5,000 residents and 1,200 company-built homes, along with a hospital, shopping center, and schools, all owned outright by the mining company. Then, copper prices sank through the late 1990s, and in June of 1999, the mine's owner shut the whole operation down, putting 2,500 people out of work in a single announcement. The smelter followed in 2003. In 2007, the company demolished the town's twin smokestacks in a controlled implosion, an image longtime residents still describe as watching the town's entire identity collapse in real time, in front of a crowd that came out just to watch it happen, some of them cheering, most of them silent. Population has fallen from around 4,300 people in the year 2000 to roughly 3,500 today, and it keeps sliding a little further each year. The catch in San Manuel is that this was a company town in the truest, oldest sense of the phrase. The homes, the hospital, the shopping center, all built and owned by one employer. When that employer left for good, there was no second industry waiting in the wings to catch the town on its way down. No logistics hub, no tourism draw, nothing but empty storefronts along a main street built for 8,000 people who never fully arrived and then mostly left anyway. Before we get to the last 3 towns on this list, and honestly some of the strangest stories I found while researching this video, if you have not hit that subscribe button yet, now is a good time. I put a lot of hours into these county records so you do not have to, and there are a lot more towns like these still to cover. Head west now, out toward the Colorado River side of the state into La Paz County, one of the least populated counties in all of Arizona. Here sits Wendon, a town of well under 500 people, built along a dry riverbed called Centennial Wash that has flooded twice in the last quarter century, badly enough to force full evacuations, once in the year 2000 and again in 2010. Wendon and its slightly larger neighbor Salome grew up together in the early 1900s as agricultural communities and, oddly enough, as health resort towns promoted by a local writer named Dick Wick Hall, who built a small national reputation, writing humor columns claiming the desert's bone-dry air could cure whatever ailed a person. Farming here has always depended entirely on groundwater pumped from private wells. And as that water table has dropped over the decades and agricultural markets have shifted overseas, the jobs that once anchored this valley have thinned out right along with it, leaving behind a scattering of ranch houses, mobile homes, and irrigated parcels that change hands for a fraction of what similar land costs closer to Phoenix. Right now, single-story homes in Wendon are listing at a median price of just $31,500, among the cheapest anywhere in the entire state of Arizona. The catch here is a combination most buyers never expect from desert real estate. Recurring flood risk from the very same wash that gives the town its water, an economy tied to agriculture that is itself tied to a shrinking aquifer nobody is refilling, and a location so remote that the nearest full-service hospital is close to an hour's drive away on a good day. Longer if that same wash has washed out the road again. 65 miles east of the Colorado River along United States Highway 60, sits Miami, Arizona, a town built in 1907 specifically to house copper miners working claims that were too far from neighboring globe to walk to comfortably every day. Miami's Sullivan Street Historic District and its Bullion Plaza Cultural Center are both listed on the National Register of Historic Places, real evidence of how substantial this town once was, back when its population swelled toward 8,000 people through the 1920s and 1930s, filling steep hillside streets with bakeries, hotels, and general stores that served miners working around the clock. The mines here never fully closed the way they did in so many other towns on this list. Freeport-McMoRan still employs around 750 people at its Miami operations today, split between the smelter and the mine itself. But the town shrank anyway, down to under 2,000 residents, as automation reduced how many workers a modern mining operation actually needs, and as younger generations left for bigger cities with more to offer. The trailing 12-month median sale price recently sat near $148,000, genuinely affordable by national standards, though noticeably higher than some of the true ghost towns on this list. The catch in Miami is subtler than most. The jobs still technically exist, but the housing stock is almost entirely historic, built between 1910 and 1960, meaning buyers inherit aging plumbing, aging wiring, and a hillside building stock that was never really designed to be renovated at any real scale. On lots too narrow and too steep for most modern contractors to want the job in the first place. Now, for one of the most dramatic collapses on this entire list. Ajo, Arizona sits deep in the Sonoran Desert, 15 miles from Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument and about 90 miles from the Mexican coast. For most of the 20th century, nearly every family in Ajo depended on one single employer, Phelps Dodge, which operated the New Cornelia open-pit copper mine, a crater now more than 1,000 feet deep, visible for miles before you even reach the edge of town. A bitter labor strike in 1983, combined with a collapse in world copper prices, pushed Phelps Dodge to shut the entire operation down in 1985. And unlike some of the other mining shutdowns on this list, there was never a real reopening to soften the blow. Over 1,000 jobs vanished almost overnight in a town that had built its entire identity, its housing, its schools, even the physical layout of its neighborhoods around that one single mine, with separate company-built sections for white, Mexican, and Native American mining families that still shape the town's geography today. The population plummeted almost immediately. Houses sat abandoned and baking in the sun for years, and Ajo's tax base fell to roughly a quarter of what it had been before the closure. Even now, decades later, unemployment runs close to double the rate in nearby Tucson or Phoenix, and nearly a third of the community lives in poverty. Ajo has clawed back some life through an artist residency program housed in the old Curley School and a slow trickle of retirees drawn to the Spanish Colonial Plaza at its center. But make no mistake, this is still a town 2 hours from Phoenix and 2.5 hours from Tucson, isolated enough that a serious medical emergency means a very long, very lonely drive, past miles of open desert and Border Patrol checkpoints, before you reach a hospital that can actually help you. The catch in Ajo is geography as much as it is economics. Even if you genuinely love desert silence, you are choosing a level of isolation that very few people are actually built for long term. That brings us to Clifton, in Greenlee County, tucked so tightly into a canyon that the town's main street and the San Francisco River practically share the same footprint. Locals have called it the town too tough to die for more than a century, and the nickname has been earned the hard way, over and over again. Clifton grew up around the Clifton-Morenci Copper District, one of the largest copper-producing regions on the planet, and by 1910 its population had reached roughly 5,000 people, with the wider mining district, including the now vanished town of Metcalf, nearing 18,000 residents at its absolute peak. Copper is a boom and bust business by its very nature, always has been, and Clifton has lived through nearly every version of that cycle. Mine closures during price collapses back in the 1890s, a 4-year shutdown during the Great Depression, and a brutal, prolonged labor strike in 1983 that some residents still describe as the moment that broke the town's spirit for good. Population fell as low as 1,500 people by the 1990 census, a staggering drop from its heyday. And for a while, it genuinely looked like Clifton might join Metcalfe as just another name on an old map. What makes Clifton's story remarkable and worth saving for last is that it has recently begun climbing back, with the 2020 census recording around 4,000 residents, many of them Latino families with generations of roots in this exact valley. Drawn back by renewed hiring at the Morenci mine, still one of the largest copper mines in North America, a comeback almost none of the other towns on this list have managed at anywhere near the same scale. Even so, the catch in Clifton has never really changed across 150 years of history. This entire economy rests on the price of a single metal, traded on a global market this small canyon town has zero control over. When copper is up, Clifton breathes easier. When copper drops, the layoffs come fast, and the town's own history proves again and again that it can happen at any time. Here is the honest truth, though, and I want to say this clearly because I have read a lot of these county records, and this one pattern shows up every single time. These towns did not empty out because the people who lived there failed at something, made bad decisions, or somehow deserved what happened to their community. They emptied out because a single company, a single commodity, or a single industry decided from a boardroom hundreds or thousands of miles away that the math no longer worked for them. Copper prices dip on a spreadsheet in another state entirely, hundreds of miles away, and a town of 5,000 becomes a town of 500 within a single decade. That is not a moral failing on anyone's part, and it is not something the people who stayed behind could have simply worked harder to prevent. It is simply what happens when an entire community's survival depends on one employer, one mine, one railroad line, or one aquifer that nobody was watching closely enough. Every single town on this list learned that lesson the same painful way, at a different time, for a different reason, but always with the same result. So, who could actually live in a place like this? Realistically, someone who works remotely and does not need a hospital nearby in a hurry. Someone retired, with a paid-off vehicle and the patience for a long drive to the pharmacy. Someone willing to trade convenience and resale value for silence, space, and a monthly house payment smaller than most people's car payment. It is not for everyone, and honestly, it probably should not be. But for the right person, in the right town on this list, $50,000 buys a level of freedom that simply does not exist anywhere near a city anymore, and may never exist again, as prices keep climbing everywhere else in this country. That is the real trade these towns are quietly offering, whether anyone is buying or not. I will leave you with one question, because I genuinely want to know the answer. If you had to pick just one town from this list to actually move to, which one would it be? And could you honestly make a life there? Tell me in the comments below, and if you already live in a town like this, I would genuinely love to hear what daily life actually looks like from where you are. There are dozens more towns exactly like these scattered across this country, quietly waiting to be found, half emptied out and half hanging on out of pure stubbornness. And we are only just getting started looking for them. This video is for informational and historical purposes only and is not financial or investment advice. Property values change, market conditions vary by neighborhood and by listing, and viewers should do their own research and consult a licensed professional before making any purchase decisions.